There's a phrase I used to say to Greg. I said it so many times over those 11 years that it became something close to a vow, something close to a prayer. We are in the business of staying alive. That was our job. That was our mission. That was the one thing I held on to when everything else felt like it was slipping. We are in the business of staying alive. And let me tell you, it was the hardest work I have ever done in my life. I don't know how we got through those years after the diagnosis. I genuinely don't. I worked full time. I cared for Greg. We raised our family together. 5 children, a household, a life, all of it continued because it had to continue. Because children still need breakfast and homework help and someone to show up at the school play regardless of what is happening in the hospital. Greg had to shut down his private law practice. He stepped down from his role as a magistrate court judge. He gave up the work he loved because his one job now, his full-time job, was fighting to stay alive. And fight he did. Multiple cancer removal surgeries, hospital stays that blurred together, hundreds of chemotherapy treatments, radiation, travel back and forth to out-of-state hospital for routine treatments, for off-protocol studies, for any door that would open. Every 2 weeks like clockwork. Blood work to check his cancer numbers and then the health of his blood, then chemotherapy for several hours, and then the waiting. Get sick, recover, repeat. Get sick, recover, repeat. That was the rhythm of our lives. I used to stay up at night listening to Greg breathe, not because I couldn't sleep, because I needed to know he was still there. He sometimes had shortness of breath. There were nights he sounded like he had stopped breathing altogether. Irregular heartbeats, the kind of nausea and diarrhea from chemotherapy that is violent and relentless and strips a person down to almost nothing. And there was always the beeping, the chemotherapy bag connected on his waist through his port in his chest. It would beep each time medicine was released into his body, steady and rhythmic all night long. I learned to fall asleep to those beeps. They became hypnotic to me. As strange as that sound became the sound of Greg still fighting, the sound of medicine still working, the sound of one more night, and I still hear it sometimes. When Greg stopped responding to his first-line chemotherapy and then his second, his CA numbers climbed in spite of everything we were doing. Something shifted in me. I became ferocious. I started calling every major cancer center that I could find. Sloan Kettering in New York, the Mayo Clinic, Emory here in Atlanta, MD Anderson in Houston. I spoke with the intake representatives. I gathered information. I made lists. We met with the Emory team in person. They were kind. They were thorough, but they had no additional protocols at the time to offer us. And something even more unsettling, their scans could not locate the new cancer growth in Greg's body. His blood work was clearly showing an increase in cancer activity, but their machines could not find it. We needed to keep looking. I remember sitting at my desk at work, just sitting there staring at nothing and crying, not the quiet kind, the kind you try to swallow because you're at work and you have to hold it together. I kept praying. I kept asking God to show us where to go. Just show us the next door, please, God. I made contact with MD Anderson. The colorectal cancer intake coordinator there requested Greg's complete medical files, hundreds of pages, physical copies only. This was not a system that accepted anything electronically at that time. So I assembled every record, every scan result, every lab report, every surgical note, and I mailed all of them to Houston, Texas. And then I waited. Weeks passed, months passed. I could not reach the coordinator. I called, and when I finally got her on the phone, she told me there had been rain in Houston and the files had gotten completely wet. She needed me to resend them again. I sent them again. And then once again, I could not reach her. Weeks went by, time was moving, and Greg's numbers were moving with it. And I was sitting in Atlanta calling a phone that no one was answering. So then I started calling anyone that picked up in the colorectal intake department, anyone. I finally reached someone in the senior position and explained everything, the months of waiting, the files sent twice, the silence. She looked into it and told me that even though the files had been delivered, they couldn't locate them in their system. And then I asked if I could send them electronically. I know that sounds foreign because that was 2010, but that was just the way it was. She said they didn't accept electronic files, but I pleaded with her anyway. And she said, fine, just send them. And I sent them electronically. And after all those months of all that waiting, all that calling, all of those files, a manager at MD Anderson placed Greg with their top colorectal oncologist, Dr. Kathy Ng. When we had the information and the path forward was clear, Greg looked at me and asked me a question. He asked me if we could afford it, MD Anderson, all of it, since he was no longer working. I looked him in the eyes and I told him that even if we had to sell the house, he was the most important person in our lives. He was not optional. He was not negotiable. He was the whole point. We are in the business of staying alive. That was not just something I said. It was how I operated. It was the job I had taken on without being asked, without training, without a manual. Wife, mother, caregiver, advocate, case manager, insurance negotiator, medical researcher, the person who stays up listening to the beeping so she can hear the breathing underneath it. That was my work, and I would do every single bit of it again. And this is what I want you to hear today. If you are a person in the family who makes the calls, who sends the files, who sits on hold and calls back and calls again, I see you. That work is invisible to almost everyone around you, but it is not invisible to me. Advocacy is love in its most exhausting form, and it matters. It changes outcomes. It opens doors that would otherwise stay closed. Don't stop making the calls. Don't stop asking those questions. Don't let anyone's silence become the final answer. You may feel like you're broken. You may have been broken, but you won't stay that way. You are still here. And the fact that you're still here means your story is not finished. Keep walking forward, and I'll be right there walking with you. I'm Nadine, and this is Widowed, Not Broken.